On the morning of November 22nd, 1963, the United States was at the peak of its power. It dominated the world in every respect, militarily, economically, and culturally. Nothing seemed out of America's reach, even the moon. The man guiding the ship of state was movie star handsome, youthful, only 46, and always seemed to know what to say and how to say it. That man was John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. JFK was born just outside of Boston on May 29, 1917, the second of 9 children. His father, Joe Kennedy, made a fortune trading stocks, selling whiskey, and financing movies. A noted philanderer, his affair with actress Gloria Swanson was the stuff of Hollywood legend. He parlayed his financial success into political success, eventually serving as Franklin Roosevelt's ambassador to Great Britain. Joe expected much from his sons, but most especially from his eldest son, Joe Jr. When young Joe died in Europe during World War II, the burden of his father's ambitions fell on his second son. But there was no certainty that John, known to his family and friends as Jack, would survive the war. Some months earlier, when his PT boat was rammed by a Japanese destroyer in the South Pacific, it was assumed that he and his entire crew had been killed. But through Kennedy's heroic efforts, all but 2 were rescued. For his bravery, Jack was awarded the Purple Heart. Living up to his father's expectations and using the connections of his maternal grandfather, John Honey Fitzgerald, a former mayor of Boston, Kennedy was elected as a Democrat to Congress in 1946. Kennedy was just 29. But he already had his eyes on a bigger prize. In 1952, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. 1 year later, he married the beautiful socialite, Jacqueline Bouvier. Their wedding was the major event of the 1953 social season. There were 700 guests at the ceremony and 1,200 at the reception. With his new wife and new Senate seat, Kennedy was making all the right moves. Bored by the endless committee meetings in Congress, he focused on increasing his national profile, traveling around the country, giving speeches, and appearing on talk shows to discuss current events. With his distinct Boston accent, he developed a dynamic speaking style which, coupled with his good looks and beautiful young family, made him picture perfect for the new age of television. He positioned himself as a centrist on domestic policy and a staunch anti-communist on foreign policy. By 1960, he was ready to make his presidential move. While his critics argued that at age 43 he was too young and inexperienced for the nation's highest office, Kennedy argued that it was time for a new generation to take charge. With his shrewd and loyal brother Bobby running his campaign, Kennedy won the Democratic nomination. But the race against Richard Nixon, Dwight Eisenhower's vice president, would prove to be much tougher. 2 things stood in his way. One was his Catholic faith. More than a few Americans wondered whether Kennedy would be more loyal to the Pope than to the Constitution. The other was a charge that he was much less experienced than his opponent. He dealt with the first problem by confronting it head-on. "No one asked me my religion in the South Pacific," was his mic drop response. It worked. He dealt with the second objection by debating Nixon 4 times, the first televised presidential debates ever. Positioning himself to the right of Nixon on the communist threat, his command of the facts was impressive. Even more impressive was how he looked on camera, cool, collected, and charismatic. Nixon, in contrast, looked tired and pale. Still, with all that, Kennedy barely managed to squeak out the win. It was so close that many urged Nixon to contest the results, but Nixon refused. He didn't want the country distracted in the middle of the Cold War. Kennedy got off to a great start with one of the most stirring inaugural addresses in American history. The most famous line was, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Lines like this inspired millions, not only in the U.S., but around the world, and helped to create the Kennedy mystique. There were muscular lines, too, such as America would pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. But lofty rhetoric, Kennedy soon learned, was no substitute for rigorous planning. His first attempt to promote liberty was a disaster. The April 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion to oust Cuban communist leader Fidel Castro. Concocted by the CIA, It was supposed to look like a homegrown Cuban uprising, but nothing went as planned, and Kennedy soon became disenchanted. When the CIA-trained invaders, Cuban exiles, failed to secure a beachhead, Kennedy refused to order air support. Many of the exiles were slaughtered. The rest were captured by Castro's military. It was a humiliating defeat and bolstered the critics who said that he was too young and inexperienced to be president. Were they right? The nation wouldn't have to wait long to find out. I'm Larry Elder for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.